Welcome, everyone, to Uplifting Humans, where we honor, empower, educate, and inspire the listener. I'm Cylindrin Buller, your host. And of course, joining me today is Matilda. And of course, this is Fires with Relationships. We jointly actually have created this beautiful series and hope to continue with the listeners. So today's topic we're going to continue is going to be fear. And as you know already, fear is an emotion and it's triggered by the threat of harm, real or imagined. Now that's the key. It could be real or it could be imagined. And of course, the threat can be for physical, emotional, or psychological well-being, and it is programmed into our nervous system. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore this beautiful emotion called fear. And now I'll turn it over to Matilda.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Matilda, Coffee with Matilda podcast. And yeah, I'm very actually excited, Salindran, because I have a lot of questions to ask from you and also questions to ask from the audience so they can think when they have the time about fear, because sometimes fear seems from a real threat, but it can also originate from imagined dangers, as you said.
Yes.
Fear can also be a symptom of some mental health conditions like panic disorder, social anxiety disorder, phobias,
right.
and post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm actually interested about phobia because I have one, and it's always a problem actually. But I think I've learned how to live with it. But it's obviously something very uncomfortable for me, and also for the people who are involved with me at that moment, which we can share with that later on. But
okay. So are you going to share with us your phobia, or are we going to be suspended and waiting for you to share that with us?
I have a bird phobia, mainly pigeon phobia. No, actually bird phobia. And yeah.
Wow. And yet pigeons are so common. How did you develop that? Was that something that you experienced, or was that something that you saw someone else experience? Because phobias can work both ways. You don't necessarily have to go through the fear of it, but by simply watching someone else go through that, you become a part of that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's something that I developed. To be honest, my parents don't know exactly what happened either. And I remember we had some patios when I was in Iran. And at that time I was young, and I mean, maybe 8, 9, and I really liked to have a Coca-Cola. My mom would put the Coca-Cola in patio because there were birds.
Yes.
And so I wouldn't go and drink it, and I was very okay to not drink it. I was like, I rather die than go to that place where there are pigeons.
Wow.
And then I realized it's real. It's a real issue. Otherwise, I would have jumped to go and have a Coke there.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's unbelievable. I think you are the first person. I mean, I've heard of spiders, I've heard of snakes, I've heard of fear of the unknown. I mean, I've heard of a lot of things, but pigeons. I wonder if it's from a past life.
Probably. I mean, I say, yeah. And actually, it's very annoying for the people around me and for me in a way too, because I mean, now that weather is nice, I cannot sit outside. Actually, I have this sense. It's a very weird. I'm not a very alert human being. Like when I walking in the street, it's not like I'm realizing everything around me. But when it's morning time,
yes,
and I know there are pigeons there around me, I'm like
yes,
super alert. Like I exactly know which bird is flying where. Their the sound of the wind are very I'm very sharp about it. And it's, I mean, I'm used to it, but I feel someone that it's new and it's around me, they get kind of weirded out, like what is she doing? Because if I'm in a restaurant and it's in a patio and the pigeon come, but
yes.
I'm gonna might make a
Oh,
scene. I don't know.
wow.
So I have to make sure that they know if I'm jumping around or I'm, or
Yes.
I cannot sit outside. So
So
exactly.
can you share with us, because I find this really fascinating. Can you share with us what you're feeling, what your body is going through? Like, are you getting fast heartbeat? Or are you breathing fast? Like, what exactly is happening? Are your muscles tensing? Because these are the common, symptoms that you'll find people going through, right? And
Exactly.
yeah.
I feel like, I mean, obviously it's a very stupid and very funny for a lot
Well,
of people, but it's very real for me. I feel like if
yes,
the pigeon comes, I'm gonna
yes.
die. How stupid is that? But that's the feeling.
Wow. Wow.
I feel like if the pigeon comes on me, I will
Yes.
die.
Wow.
And one thing that was very um, eye-opening for me years
Yes.
ago, I think when I just moved to New York, I remember I was with my mom and I
Hmm.
was passing the street, and there were pigeons, so I start um, changing my direction, and there was a
Yes.
car coming, and my mom ran after me automatically to just save me, and the car just stopped in front of my mom. Like,
Oh, wow.
at that moment, I realized not only I'm putting my life in danger, I'm putting the people who love me around me in danger as well. Because
Danger.
at that moment, for me, the car wasn't the danger element; it was the pigeon. How
And how
crazy is
old
that?
were you? How old were you?
No, risk like 8 years ago.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, you know what? Definitely some real digging to do there, and maybe even trying to seek some help, because there are people who specialize in getting people over the phobias, whether it's through hypnotizing you, or just walking you through to gradually bring you to a point where you're not going to be reacting in the same manner. So that's fascinating. But bringing it back to where we are, and how fear affects the majority of us, and especially what's happening right now with the times and the situations that we're going through. As um, we discussed courage last week, and courage is something that is required in order to get through something. And fear is the polar opposite of that, because fear can make you run, it can make you freeze up, it can make you scream, it may make you do all sorts of things, right? So
Exactly.
so what we wanted to do was really bring it back to how are people handling the current situation, and what we're going through, and how can we actually move through this time period in an easy and more not joyful, but more of a conscious effort, because I know that we're fortunate, we may have family and loved ones around us. Really reaching out to them when we're having moments of fear would definitely help. But I think that we needed to explore it a little bit more. For me, you know, anything, whether it's your thoughts or your beliefs or your experiences, your memories, your preferences, those are all based on something from the past. Okay. So if all of those things that I've listed off are based on the past, then what you're doing is you're faced with something, as in what we're going through right now, whether it's during the lockdown, during the riots, during whatever. Now you're going to, really sit down and question the way that you are accepting or not accepting what is going on, and
I think
going,
we lost Salindran here.
oh, okay, so am I back?
Yes, we're back.
Sorry, unstable internet. What can I say? Yeah, so everything that we're using to navigate and move forward is really something that we already know. It's all those thoughts, all those belief systems, all those experiences and memories that are making us react a certain way or respond to a certain situation. So it's really important to take into consideration that you may be reacting or responding from something in the past. So if
Mm-hmm.
it is fear, then it is something that you need to question. The minute that you question something which is fearful, all of a sudden it'll allow for your mind to stop for a moment and try to look for an answer. Okay? It'll allow for that split second of a breather, so you're not on this, rant in your head internally trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What if, I'm in lockdown, I have nobody here? What if I run out of food? What if I don't find that job? What if I don't have enough money to pay for the food or the rent and it goes on and on and on. So it's the fear feeds the fear, you see? The fear feeds the fear. But where did that fear all come from? Where did it begin? And how you're responding and reacting is something from the past. Those are the memories, the belief systems, the thoughts, the experiences that you did have. Do you kind of understand that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in order to move forward, you really have to question what's coming up for you. Like, why am I feeling anxious? Why am I having these anxiety attacks? Why am I having these stress responses kick in? Why is now I have to go to see a doctor because my blood pressure's up, my heart rate is up, and it goes on and on. And realistically, you're really having to really deal with some of those past traumas, past victimizations, past fears, which you never dealt with. You just kind of shoved them into the system and hoping they'll never show up again and that you'll just keep moving forward in life. And so this time period is a beautiful time period if we can actually go back and question fear. What is this? Why is this happening? And I think the other part of it, Matilda, I'd like to bring in is that the ego thinks. The ego thinks, whereas your soul or your spirit knows. There's a difference of thinking and knowing. So when you're thinking and it's going on and on and on and on, and you're going down that little spiral into never, never land, and things are so blown out of proportion that you freeze yourself, you give yourself a heart attack because you kept thinking, overthinking, know in that precise moment that that's ego. That isn't the spirit. And remember, your spirit. And spirit knows that you will get through this.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way, actually. But now I'm gonna think that way, that a spirit can, but sometimes spirit, I mean, really, spirit knows it all, but why is it sometimes that some people, they put themselves in a dangerous situation, and it's a real danger situation, and they don't have fear, which automatically they should have that fear. Why spirit doesn't help them to have that feeling? Is it because they are not in tune with themselves?
Okay, give me an example.
Like, for example, some kids, no, I mean, maybe they're young or maybe they're careless, I don't know, or motorcycle drivers, they drive crazily. They don't
Right,
even have the fear that, okay, this is dangerous.
right.
This is not logical what you're doing, but they go for it anyway. And actually, they enjoy it. So I've done some research about it because for me, this was fascinating. And I came to this conclusion that the emotional response to fear is a highly personalized, because fear involves some of the same chemical reactions in our brain that like positive emotions like happiness has it as well, or happiness, excitement. um, on like fear, feeling fear under certain circumstances can be actually fun for some people. That's
Yeah,
why some people like to watch scary movies, or like they're adrenaline seekers and they're thriving on extreme sports.
right,
um,
right. But then again, that's a choice that they're making.
yeah,
Yeah,
but isn't that interesting that actually it's the same feeling that some of them they go into wrong relationships, and when they're abused they feel safe in it. The fear is not bothering them, whereas for other people that fear, I mean, they cannot even think about that kind of a relationship because that fear stops them going forward in that kind of a relationship.
okay, so I think I know what you're getting at. So you're thinking about, say, an abused woman.
Hmm.
And so she's, a battered woman who gets beat up every second day. And so she leaves this man, and subconsciously she goes finds another man who's going to do the
Yeah.
same thing. That in itself is definitely psychological, and you need to go get some help for that, right? But the fear that we're actually looking at right now is what okay, so I guess what you're trying to, like, a fearful person sees the world as terrifying, but a battered woman doesn't see a man as terrifying. She's looking for a relationship, so she doesn't tie the two together, you see. She doesn't look at that man initially going into that relationship, but subconsciously there's something happening, because she repeatedly goes and finds a brand new relationship, leaving one, but then always finding that same kind of man who's going to do the very same thing to her again. So she's not seeking fear.
But see, some people, yes, in abusive relationship, yes. But what
Mhm.
about people who are seeking that kind of adrenaline that logically is very dangerous? And some of them lose their life, or they have very bad accidents. Although they know, for example, this can be a very dangerous journey they're going, but they're going anyway. That fear never stops them. For example, for me, I could never, if I know something is a little bit dangerous, I can never even, I mean, not even extreme danger, something very little dangerous, I wouldn't like to go. I wouldn't like to put myself in a situation that I'm nervous, or my safety is in danger. But I have some friends that, oh my God, that's their excitement. Also,
Exactly. But they don't
they
see it the way you do. They don't see
yes,
it the way you do. And so everyone's,
wire differently.
well, yeah, and their tolerance is different, because fight or flight, the response is fight or flight, because your body is actually built to last. The body does not want you to have pain. The body does not want you to, die if it doesn't need to. Those are mechanisms that are primitive, and they're they're at your cellular level. You're wired for that in your nervous system, because you're either going to be running away from danger, or you're going to fight off danger. That's basically fight or flight. But if you
Mhm.
don't see it that way, if you do not see it that way, well, there is no fight or flight. There is no survival mechanism that's kicking in, right? And so, I mean, for me, for instance, you've got your pigeon phobia, and for me, you know it could be a fear of heights.
Mhm.
So I signed up to go and scale a building. So I was at the top of the building, I had the harness on, and I had the whole 9 yards. But then my perception of what may happen looking down, I could have puked, because it was not something that I was comfortable in doing. So in me, my fight or flight mechanism kicked in, and guess what I did? I said, I'm sorry, but I will not be doing this. And I took
Hmm.
everything off and I walked away. Now, I could go back again next time and do myself a favor by not looking down, the 26 floors of a building. I could just walk out there and keep looking at my, assistant who's going to guide me and scale me down the building. And if I don't look down, I'll be okay because all the equipment's going to save me. You see what I
Yeah.
mean? And yet, because I made the fatal mistake of going to the top of the building looking down, that was it. Game over. My fight or flight mechanism kicked in. I was like, oh my God, am I nuts? What if the ropes fail me? Right? So yeah, it's a really interesting emotion, and um, and how you can really see it is what you're feeling, because it's a nervous system that's kicking into play. You can actually, if you really pay attention, all of a sudden when you go into survival mode, am I going to live or am I not going to live,
Mhm.
you will start feeling your heart race. You will start feeling your muscles tense up. You will start feeling that your breath is hyperventilation starts to happen. And that's when you can actually train yourself to take long, deep, controlled, consciously controlled breathing techniques that will help you, through the mechanism of the fight or flight situation. Because guess what? If you cannot get a hold of fear and you put yourself in fight or flight one too many times,
Yeah.
you are damaging your immune system.
Maybe that's why
You're damaging your immune system
maybe that's
because,
why I get sick very easily. Maybe it's because of that.
yeah, yeah,
Wow.
I totally believe that, because, you cannot be running away from a saber-toothed tiger. You cannot be running away from, some snake that's going to come to you in Paris and, eat you, because that's what that system is made for. That system of fight or flight was made for you to make sure that Matilda lives for as long as possible. But when Matilda looks at a pigeon and thinks the pigeon's going to kill
A
her,
lion.
so so guess what? You're killing your immune system. You're killing your immune system. Slowly, 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 your immune
Mhm.
system becomes compromised. And that's what's happening right now. I mean, when you're in fear mode, Matilda, here's another one for the listeners to really think about. When you're in fear mode, you are easily manipulated. You're very easily manipulated, because with fear
Well,
you're able to, you'll do whatever it takes. Oh, as long as I don't get that, as long as I don't get sick, as long as I live through this, I'll do whatever someone tells me. And then they go out and they get some shady doctors to tell you all
yeah.
this nonsense, and then you're running with it. And the very same neighbors that you loved and spoke to every day, all of a sudden you're looking at them like they're going to come and kill you, right? And
Exactly.
it's like, what is all this about? And you know what it's all about is it goes back to being sensible. It's going back to being a very sensible, grounded, balanced individual. So take that time to really look after yourself. You know, go for that walk. If you have a pet, it's beautiful because the pet, any pet, dog, cat, pigeon, whatever it is, it will take some of that nervousness out of your system, and you'll live more healthy for a longer period of time because your immune system will not be affected. But if you're constantly in fight or flight, your immune system is something which is definitely uh, going to be affected in the long run.
Wow, I'm gonna note to it. I mean, I don't know how I have to fix this thing, but I mean, it has to be fixed because, yeah, it's kind of not fun for people around me.
Yeah,
Also,
yeah.
Salindra, now that you were explaining about what's happening in the society, I came to this understanding that actually fear is a fascinating emotion because societies or governments use fear to control their citizens.
Well, it's to pass
And
their agendas. Exactly.
yeah,
And aren't we in such good hands that that they're going to know the best for us and the best for our families? Like I don't think so. Not in my world, They really do use the fear mechanism to manipulate everybody. But fear, whether it's rational or irrational, it's caused by negative thinking. Full
hmm
stop. Full stop. So what happens is something happens, you don't just deal with it once and shake it off and walk away like a dog or a cat, because they know how to do that.
hmm
We as a human being, what happens is that we become attached to that. So then, of course, one negative thinking pattern goes on to more and more and more and more. So you could start by worrying, and the worrying becomes anxiety, and the anxiety becomes, I'm going to never speak to my neighbor because my neighbor could be the one who's going to kill me, right?
yeah.
So how do you get away from the negative chatter that happens, Matilda?
But clearly I haven't, I don't do anything about the pigeon one. I'm like, let it be.
Yes.
The other ones, actually, it's very interesting. Fear was something, a topic that I was very interested because I feel it can be positive and it can be negative as well. Positive, if you feel fear at a certain level, can give you a beautiful fuel to do amazing things in life. For example, you have fear of doing, I don't know, you have a speech and you have that fear. It's actually a beautiful feeling. It's not an extreme feeling, obviously, but it's a nice fear because it makes you to be more focused to deliver your speech properly. This fear makes you practice your speech beforehand, or you have an exam. So if you don't have any fear, you're not going to even study. You're going to get F. But this fear makes you study before and then be nervous a little bit, wake up earlier, go to school earlier, or try to find classmates that can help you with it. So it can be positive, because I also know people who don't have the fear feeling. There are they cannot be successful in life. Also, there is another side of fear, that if you feel fear like me about pigeons, some part of your life is paralyzed. Imagine it's a nice weather, but for me, I wouldn't even think that I should go sit somewhere that there are pigeons. I would rather sit inside and not enjoy the weather, but at least I'm not dealing with the pigeons.
Well, and it,
Um,
yeah, no, and it reminds
and
me,
how many times,
Yeah, go ahead.
and
Sorry.
how many in my life I look back, I had the fear to stop me for doing something amazing. And now, after this research, I realize it's not even rational. So it's something that maybe I can control of it.
Hmm.
And I want to learn, maybe after this, after our conversation together, maybe I will get some tips from you how I can manage fear. I have two very big questions for you. How someone can manage the fear, because I think if you have a healthy relationship with fear, it can be very useful for you and you can be a very successful human being if you
Yes.
can navigate the fear for as a good fuel for you. And how people develop these fears, what age, do you know what age it starts? Because it's not like all the brothers sisters have the same fears. Some of them I've seen in family, some of the brothers or sisters, they are like adrenaline junkie. I think it's the wrong word to it, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I
Uh,
totally get that. I totally get that. But, you know, some of the common fears, Matilda, are fear of failure, fear
mhm,
of rejection, right? Fear of missing out, or fear of change. They don't like change. They like to be comfortable because they know it's
mhm,
familiar, right? And of course, fear of being judged. Who wants to be judged, right? Or just plain old something bad happening. You know, fear of getting hurt. But you know, the interesting thing about fear is that there was a study done in the States, and they interviewed 100 people, or was it 1,000 people? I can't remember, between the ages of 13 and 18. And do you know what their 10 biggest fears were? Not not fear of failure, not fear of rejection or missing out or fear of change or fear of all of this. Those are normal human fears, okay? But guess what the average American's fears are? Are you
fear
ready?
of judgment, not liking in a Facebook page or something like that, no?
We no, and you're gonna, once I mention these, you're gonna be like, oh my God, that's so true. Because in the States, they are fed fear. They are fed fear. So their number one fear, terrorist attacks. Number one fear,
Mm-hmm.
terrorist attacks. Then the other ones are in, and this, the rest of them don't have an order. Fear of spiders, fear of death, fear of failure. That's the first one out of the normal fear that the rest of the world has. Fear of failure is one. Fear of war,
Mm-hmm.
fear of criminal or gang violence, fear of the future, fear of a nuclear war. And then the last one, fear of being alone. I found that very interesting because this teaches you something, is how much of the fear that you have is instilled by your government
CNN.
and social media.
Yeah,
Right?
it's amazing. It's amazing. A society, I've read in a philosophy actually, they're saying a society that has fear of death, it
Yes.
has a fear of living as well. I think in Spanish culture, they have a very interesting connection with death. So that's why they're very lively people. The culture celebrates life very much better than, for example, in American culture, because in American culture they look at death in a very negative and very sad way of um, sad sad way. But in other some other cultures, they actually they take it lightly about it. They
Well, they think that it's a normal cycle of life.
mm,
Birth, death, like birth, life, death. That's, I mean, that's a whole cycle, right? And so one or the other, it doesn't make a difference because you're always there in spirit. You're eternal. In spirit, you are eternal. I think where the difference is, you know, Matilda, in the States is that death is not something that is easily discussed. There are many cultures that they do not discuss death. They do not open up that Pandora's box about death. What happens to you once you've lived a full life? What happens to you when you cross over? Where do you go? They don't have a healthy conversation. I
mhm.
find that there's many cultures that actually they discuss death just like they would discuss a birth or discuss life. It's a very acceptable conversation to have. It's kind of like the old taboo, you know. Back in the day, people wouldn't discuss. They wouldn't discuss sex. It was something that's behind the closed doors, right? So, how comfortable are you? And in that comfort, what have you learned, right? And you know, fear of failure, fear of rejection, those are common, right? Nobody wants to fail. But in failure, we are taught that there, even in failure, there's a lesson, as long as you can focus in on that lesson. Fear of rejection, right? I mean, what is fear of rejection? Fear of rejection is you start equating yourself as not good enough. But when you look at it as fear of rejection, well, everyone has free will and choice. Maybe to
Not
you
true.
it was perfect, but maybe for the other person it wasn't. But we don't go and hide in a closet. What we do is we go and seek some assistance, some help, something. If you're feeling that rejection is creeping to the point where it's paralyzing you, you will go and get some help, right?
Yeah, and so, Salina, like I'm just stuck with the conversation you just said about fear of death, and I'm questioning myself. Do I have a fear of death? And actually, I think I do. Now I'm panicking. I think I do have it, and I'm feeling maybe I have more. Um, I have fear of my loved ones not having me than me being. Because I feel like if I die, I don't feel anything, and I'm gonna be in a nothingness, maybe. But yeah, how can someone overcome that fear
The fear
of
of
death?
death. Well,
Is
and
it
that's a very,
natural to feel it or not? I don't know.
do you know anyone that lived forever?
No.
Do you know even a plant doesn't live forever? Even a rock doesn't live forever. You think about it, it is the normal cycle of life. And so
But
when
the
you start,
idea,
what's
sorry,
that?
but the idea that I feel like, oh, I'm not going to exist anymore in the form that I know, it makes me sad. Now I'm going to cry for
Why?
myself that I'm going to die one. I
But
think I need to see a therapist here.
you usually when people are afraid of death, I hate to, they're not fearful of death for themselves.
Hmm.
There's a fear of how I'm going to die, what's
Yeah.
going to happen to me when I die, and where am I going to go. They don't necessarily reflect on what is going to happen with my loved ones, unless, I could understand it's a young mother and has children and all of that, because, a mother feels responsible and wants to make sure that, she was a guardian to these children and that they're taken care of. But it's very interesting. Death is a beautiful example of fear, because I know a lot of people that are afraid of death. They're afraid of their loved ones passing away and leaving them behind. So in other words, a child will, with the thought of my parents no longer ever being here, the child will cry, because what will I do without mom and dad? You see? So it's a
Hmm.
very interesting conversation that each of our listeners should actually have with themselves. Are you more afraid of dying, or are you more afraid that your loved ones die? What are you? That's a very different way of looking at it. A very
I
different way of looking at it, because I
I
know,
rather, yeah,
yeah,
now I'm thinking, Salinger, and I think I rather die, even if it's 5 minutes later than my loved ones, because I wouldn't want them to feel that pain of mine. I mean, maybe I'm feeling a lot about myself, but about my mom, I would never want her feel that pain, or my grandma, or my dad, or my, I don't know if
yeah,
you know.
no. And what you're speaking of, Matilda, is speaking of death, but out of line.
Hmm.
That's okay. So when I say that, speaking about death out of line, what I mean is normal cycle of life is grandmother goes first, mother and father go next, then it's you, and then it's your children. You understand? So there's a real line and a natural way that one crosses over. If everything was good and normal, that is typical. But sometimes what happens is that it is out of line, where a mother or father has to see their beautiful young child go before them. Now it's very difficult for the mother and father, because if you think about a mother or father, they would give their life up. They would give their life up for their son or daughter or whoever to have a full
Hmm.
life, you see? And so when it's out of line, it doesn't matter. it will always be very difficult because it's out of line. But now think about it, if everybody went in the order that typically
Mm.
nature has made things to move forward, it's death is easier to handle, right? When you look at it,
Mm.
okay, if your grandmother goes before your parents, it's
I
easier.
know. I don't want to die. But
No,
obviously I'm
not
gonna die.
you, but if, when it's
Yeah.
in order. Now,
Yes.
I've been in situations where I have good friends where the child dies before the mother or father.
Yeah.
Do you know how difficult that is for a mother or father? And it wasn't a fear that brought them to that point. It was just something that was going to happen, and they were going to have to deal with it. And to deal with it would have been very, very difficult because it was out of line. Um, so, I mean, our show isn't about death, but it's a really important question for you is,
Yeah.
what is your fear? Is your fear death? I mean, some people are afraid that they're afraid of death because they think they're going to some place called hell. And
Yeah.
I find that quite interesting, because in my understanding of life and my belief system, and it goes back to those very same things, where you are and how you handle fear is about your thoughts, beliefs, experiences, memories, preferences, etc., etc., etc. And my belief system, heaven and hell is on earth.
Yeah. That's how religion controls people, by fearing them. Woo.
No, if you had a good life here, well, then it was heaven for you. And if life here was difficult, well, then you've already been to hell, so it couldn't get any worse. But
Exactly.
and that's me. That's my understanding of who I am and where I am. But some people have fear of death because they were not very kind
Mm.
individuals, and they created a lot of suffering, not just for themselves. They created a lot of suffering for other people, and they're not willing to face the hell that they think they're going to, and they're
Mm-hmm.
afraid because of that, right? So
True.
it's a really important question, um, and
And you know what, Salindran, if I look back, I haven't done lots of things in my life physically. Emotionally, somehow I feel I'm very strong or I can recover. But physically, I haven't done anything very crazy because I'm always afraid if something happens to me, or I have this fear of, oh, I don't want to break something, or I don't want to die.
yeah, there's
And
the
it's
fear of hurting, getting hurt.
and uh, if you look at it, maybe, I mean, it's not logical what I'm thinking about a lot of times, and it maybe stopped me to to see my full potential in life. So it's interesting to, maybe I have to navigate, or maybe I have to go deeper in this to realize, why am I afraid of maybe a lot of things, and what is the reason, maybe when I developed it, and how can I overcome it? Because if I don't have the fear, maybe I can conquer the world and feel that. And I actually like men, that they don't have that fear. It's kind of exciting for me. I
Mm.
guess it's the opposite of it.
And there is a lot of things to say about male fear and female fear, and the fears are different. And so, I mean, that's again, it's very internal. But if our listeners really truly want to look at fear, fear was something that was gifted to us to make sure that we actually survive and live, that we do not jump off that bridge thinking that we are going to be okay. It was gifted to us. But if fear is running your life, now you've got a problem. If you're not living a full life the way you want to live a full life and experience it in its totality, well, then you've got something to really go back and look at very closely. And I think it's important to start with questioning. Question
Mhm.
yourself. Because when you question yourself, even if you don't have the answers, the brain the brain will look for an answer, and it will find the answer for you. And whatever that answer is, question that answer. And you'll come up with an answer. Now question it again. And it's interesting, when you're faced with fear, you have to face the fear and go through it. That is the only way.
Courage. You need
That's
courage
right.
in this one.
That's right. That's when fear turns into courage.
So, Salindran, I have a question for you. I have these friends. I have a couple of friends during COVID. They were experiencing panic attacks, and for me, it was interesting. Obviously, it's not a realistic fear that they're feeling, so it's a kind of an imaginative thing. But what triggers this kind of emotions? And do you think we can control them? Do we feed them? What do we do that makes it more, for example, with this situation in the world, some people are actually taking pills
Well,
to not.
yes, because they don't have the mechanisms or the know-how. So instead of coming to a point where you know, they become paralyzed, or they freeze up, or they freak out, they choose to go ahead and numb themselves out. And so what they'll do is they'll take certain, it could be narcotics, it could be alcohol, it could be drugs,
Yes.
it could be a prescription drugs. I mean, it's all the same, unless you can sit down and have a deep conversation about what is coming up, because it's going to have to be dealt with. You can't just keep drinking it away. You can't just, look for a prescription to help you. Um, and the way out of fear is, number one, catch it when it starts.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, what drives fear is more and more negative self-talk. It's the negative self-talk. So you start off with, oh, there's a spider. What if there's lots of spiders? Now my room is full of spiders. Oh my God, I got to get out of here, because what if I go to sleep and all these spiders attack me in the middle of the night? You see what I mean? It's like it's one little spider, and now it's taken over your world. Why not just be reasonable and start with the small steps? Catch yourself when you're going down that negative spiral, and say to yourself, now, why is it that I'm feeling this?
Mm.
Let it feel what is coming up. I'm feeling very nervous. I'm feeling so nervous. I'm feeling nervous because, for instance, your friend, she's feeling nervous and anxious about her future. What
Yeah.
am I going to do if I lose my job? What am I going to do if I can't pay my bills? What if
Mhm.
we don't have enough food to eat? What if I drop in my shower, and because we're isolated, no one even knows?
Mhm.
And I can tell you, the what ifs are never ending. The possibilities are never ending. So why not just catch yourself when you start? Question it right away. And as soon as you find yourself doing negative self-talk, go do something you enjoy. Go do something that you enjoy. Take yourself out of it, because it goes back to, when you're in that state, you sit a certain way, your body needs to get up and be active, and all of a sudden the good hormones will kick in, and the endorphins will kick in, because you're doing something you enjoy. So even if there's all this negative chitter chatter, but you're doing something you enjoy, negative is here, but when you're doing something positive, it will lift the negative up. Doesn't have a choice. It can't exist. Negative and positive cannot exist at the same time. You're either negative or you're positive, but you can't be negative and positive at the same time. So do
Also,
something.
Salindran, I mean, from our conversation, I'm thinking, if people have self-love and self-mastery, again from the first episode, um, they might not be fear. I mean, I think it's gonna help them with the fear of judgment. It will be maybe help them with the fear of, oh, I'm going to be alone, for the relationship wise. They might, it kind of help them with, I don't know.
Well, when you're actually going positive, when you're actually doing, when you actually love yourself, and
Yeah.
love is the basis of everything. So when you're actually completely 100% loving yourself, there's nothing in the world that can destroy you. There's nothing in the world that can stop you. There's absolutely nothing that you can't overcome. And that's a fact, because you're so positive, your spirit's lifted so high, and all of a sudden nothing is impossible. Everything is possible. And
Exactly.
that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, right? Is
I
that
hope.
when you're in good spirits, of course you can do anything, be anything, have anything.
So do you think by if I work on my self-love, obviously it's something that I think everyone has to work it all the time on it. Do you think I'm gonna overcome my phobia? Nah.
Well, again, Matilda, if a phobia is something where, it will.
Psychological.
Well, yes, it is, and it's also not just psychological, because it's physical as well. You're going to have some physical
Mm.
reaction as that,
Yeah.
phobia is happening, and of course, so it's psychological, and it's physical, and of course, it's emotional. So something of those three areas has to break. When a
Mm-hmm.
pigeon comes, you've got to break. You've got to do something which you normally don't do. The easiest and the fastest thing is to look at that pigeon, maybe see a butterfly instead of a pigeon.
Yeah.
Uh, the other thing is that when you see the pigeon, you might want to just breathe. Look at what's happening in your body. Maybe you're breathing shallow, you're not breathing deep. So you have to change that. But I mean, there's
I,
so many ways to go down that journey. But I think uh, fear is a teacher for us.
yeah.
Fear is a great teacher. We can learn so much from fear. We get to learn so much about ourselves,
Ourselves too.
right? As we're going through fear. And the beauty of fear, the beauty of fear is that when you actually overcome a fear,
It's a powerful feeling.
my God, you know how you feel. And there's no one that can take that away from you, right? Fear
Yeah.
is a beautiful place, and it has a place. It truly has a place in the whole, in the whole of life. Fear is also necessary.
I have two questions for you, Salindra. Uh, One about, do you know what age? Because I don't think children, do they born with fear? I don't think that emotion is there when they're born. It's kind of.
Well, the children are born with fear, but that is the innate desire to survive.
Mhm.
We all have that. We're all born to make sure that we don't go and kill ourselves. That's why it's really important to be wired that way when you're born. But you have to understand that a child, from my belief is prior to conception, but some people say, okay, from the minute that you're conceived to the age of 7 or 8, a child will see their caregiver act and react to certain situations. So if the caregiver is afraid of pigeons, the
Yeah.
child will become afraid of pigeons.
Oh,
If
poor
the care,
baby.
yes, yes. If the caregiver is afraid of dogs, the child will pick up that I should be afraid of dogs before they learn
Oh,
how to speak and all of that. So fear is something which is learned as well, but not even having gone through it. They could just look at someone else going through fear and
mm.
become fearful for the rest of their life.
It's interesting. I was doing some research because I wanted to see what age they develop this or they understand fear fully. Um, I've came across that after age of 2, children start experiencing different fears, like fear of separation from their parents, and then slowly later on, a lot of children they are dealing with the darkness, feeling scared of the dark. And if and these studies were saying if the parents don't take care of this uh, in a right way, the child can grow up and have lots of damages. It was interesting. I was like, you would never even think, but I guess
Well, I
maybe lots
mean,
of psychological, maybe our, maybe, I don't know. It's just something that we can think about. Maybe our fear of failure comes from fear of darkness, that we didn't deal with it from a young age in a right way.
well,
Maybe.
well, it could be, but fear of darkness is really a fear of the unknown. Because when you see a
Yeah.
child who's afraid, they're not afraid of the darkness per se. They're afraid of what they think is in the darkness. They're
Mm.
afraid of the unknown that exists in the darkness, right? And
Yeah.
so that is a common fear. That is a very common fear that a lot of human beings have, is fear of the unknown, because
Exactly.
they like to know, because they've always been taught to navigate life with, if I do A, B, C, then my result will be whatever, right? But
Mm.
if you're doing A, B, C, but the result is unknown, then it becomes a fear. Like, why would I do that if I don't know what the end result is? You see? So that again are key things that you have to pay attention to. That's why it's very important to allow your children to be by themselves and play the way they want to play. That's very
Mm.
important, that they understand that everything in life is to experience and to learn and to grow from. That's why failure shouldn't be feared. Failure should be, oh, okay, well, next time, I'll know that, right? If
Don't you
you're
think
afraid of,
culture has a big influence in it, Salindran? Some cultures condemn failure. I know, for example, in Swiss culture, if you do something, you start a business and you fail, it's a very big um, it's very bad. They look at it in a bad way. For example, in America, that feeling is not there. That's why a lot of startups have the courage to start something, because they don't care if they fail something. That they look at failure in a business as a very normal part of life. Whereas, I don't know, maybe Iranian or Armenian culture looks at it very differently. So
well, I mean,
culture has a lot of big influence in it, no?
I think it's generational. Don't you see, like, whatever culture you're speaking of, it depends on the generation, because the older generations viewed a lot of things differently than the younger generations, right?
Mm.
So that, yeah, I do believe that there are certain things that are definitely about the community or culture or the area of the world that you come from. You know, if you do not, get into certain prestigious universities, and certain individuals felt that they failed their family, they failed their parents, they would go and commit suicide because they
Yeah.
didn't make it. But when you look at that, who was actually the contributor to that belief system? Who was the
Um,
contributor? It was the parent, right?
yeah.
Yeah, it's a belief system, and a belief system that doesn't serve the next generation. So uh, you know um, I have a lot of friends from the Armenian and Iranian communities here in Vancouver. I can assure you that they do not think the way their counterparts think in the old country, because
Mm.
here it's not looked at, and especially the younger generation, they're like, no, I'll try again. I'll try and try again. And that's how life is. And that's the way life should be. Life is to be enjoyed and to explore and to appreciate the ups, the downs, and all arounds. you know, so fear is a good thing as long as it doesn't run your life, as long as it doesn't paralyze you, it doesn't allow you to have a full life that you're supposed to have. Fear is a good thing. So
Exactly. To have a good relationship with fear.
that's
Make
right.
it your friend.
That's right. That's right. Because a good friend will allow you to see the truth. A good friend would never disempower you and take control of you. A good friend doesn't do that. So, on that note, I'm Cylindrin Buller from Uplifting Humans, where we honor, empower, educate, and inspire the listener. Thank you for joining us, Matilda.
And I'm Matilda, host of Coffee with Matilda, a journey to self. And we'll see you guys next time. Ciao.